All right. Hello, Albert's friends. It's a little bit of a difference here today with the Tuesday night mock interview. We're coming live from my timeline because Zoom has neglected to work. And so instead, I'm going to give some here people in my community a little taste of what we've been doing on Albert's job listings and referrals over the past couple of months. I hope you're having a safe week out there amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that we have done over the last couple of months is to provide a mock interview service. Joining us to do that is CORY HIROMOTO of CareerShakers.com. And CORY has been with us for the last couple of months, and he's interviewed everyone from nonprofit to marketing to software developers and UX designers. And in addition to being the founder of CareerShakers.com, which is a career search website, he is also a Fortune 500 recruiter, a graduate of Santa Clara University, and a former management consultant. Joining him is Alexander Tam, a technical project manager who is early on in his career. All right, so the rules of this are pretty simple. You unfortunately don't get to see my face for the majority of this video, but I will be going on mute and CORY will interview Alex with a bunch of different questions. All of you get to offer your feedback and ask any interview questions as if you're the hiring manager as well. So CORY, in this very special edition on my wall, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to you, and I'll be sharing this particular video with other individuals so that we can have more audiences watching us.
Awesome. Thank you, Albert. I appreciate it. And hello to Albert's friends and timeline. Nice to meet everybody. As Albert said, we're doing a bit of a workaround right now. We had some technical difficulties getting Zoom to work with Facebook Live in the Albert's listing job board. But feel free to check out that community. It's a great resource for getting prepared for a job, looking for a job, or just general networking. And if you even have career advice that you would like to share and help or mentor others, it's also a really great place to go. And to help folks during the COVID epidemic, as well as get people prepared for when COVID hopefully eventually does go away and the job market reopens, we have been hosting these mock interview sessions almost every week, actually. And Alexander has bravely volunteered himself and his time to participate in this week's mock interview session. Feel free to leave comments. Well, generally there's comments and things in the Facebook Live, but I'll try and find those. Leave your comments, questions. Let us know if there's anything you're curious about, any difficult interview questions, and we'll try and address everything that you guys are thinking about. In the past, we've covered certain topics like re-entering the workforce after taking a break, moving from an individual contributor role into a managerial role, switching from nonprofit to corporate, corporate to nonprofit, as well as general career changes overall. And so today I'm going to kick it over now to Alexander, who is going to be our brave volunteer. He can give a little bit of background and information about himself and kind of what he's looking for potentially in a new role or opportunity or company. Maybe you guys have any connections or know if your company is even hiring. Please reach out to me or Alexander and we can start the networking process. So I'll kick it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm Alexander. I am a project specialist at Buckle-Smith Electric, and a project manager or project management is the methodology of gathering, organizing, and managing resources in order to complete a project. And a project is not necessarily a process or an operation. It's a thing that has a beginning and an end. So you could have a project to create or implement a process, but it's not the process itself. So I am looking around for different opportunities. Right now, my role has me doing a lot of little different things. I work at a smaller company, and I'm looking for opportunities that would set me in a more solid, defined role as a project manager.
Got it. All right. So if any of you are in the project management space or program management space, because I know that there is overlap and similarities, feel free to reach out to Alexander. You can DM him, hit him up on his LinkedIn, etc. We would love to show some love for Alex, especially for being so brave and putting himself out there. As you can see on my screen, I'll be jumping back and forth between his resume as well as one of the sample job descriptions in which he is interested in, which is this one here for Fetch Robotics. We are aware that the role is closed, but this is just a sample exercise. And so this was just something that everyone can look at and follow along. For those of you who are new here and joining us for the very first mock interview session, generally how it works is we'll do a full practice question as if it was a real interview. And then at the end of each question, I will pause, stop, give Alexander, some feedback. And then I'll also be checking the comments and things intermittently to see if there's any questions or things you guys want me to answer. In general, all the questions that I've customized and created for Alexander are here on my little paper. And I try to keep them as, I would say, generic questions as possible. And what I mean by that is we will not be doing any technical coding interview questions just because we want to keep it as beneficial and broad for the rest of the audience as possible. So I guess with that being said, before we start the actual practice session itself, I do like to give a little bit of an overview of the role, just so folks can kind of understand what types of questions we'll be answering, and then you'll have context as to why Alexander is answering a question a certain way. So for those folks who may not be familiar, can you give a quick overview or breakdown essentially of what a technical project manager does, or technical program manager, also known as TPM?
I'm sorry, that question was for
Yeah,
me, or
it's for you. It's for you.
can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, can you explain what a technical project manager is?
Oh, I
or
see.
does?
Yes. So the difference between, I guess the technical portion of it is just specifically for technical projects. So if I'm doing like an assembly project, what I usually do, or there's like an electrical project, or a process to improve some sort of documentation process, or a process for documentation, that would be how I would define a technical project. Does that make sense?
I think just to add a little bit of color, so a technical project manager is very similar to a project manager or program manager role, wherein you'd be coordinating and managing different deadlines and deliverables across different functions in order to complete either, in this case, a single project or an overall program, which is sometimes known as a combination of different projects. Now, for technical roles, it has technical in the title because you'll be working a lot with engineering teams, product management, as well as QA and other overall IT/engineering focused teams. The difference between like a technical project manager role and a general project manager role is they do require some context from their TPMs in terms of what the engineers are working on, because you'll need to be able to prioritize certain deadlines, features, et cetera, and it also has very close similarities with like a technical program manager role. So you may see those two job titles interchanged. This one is a technical project manager, but there's also a technical program manager. The job descriptions do read very, very similarly. You will notice that there is a requirement for Agile, which is commonly used, especially for product manager roles. So for those of you who were wondering, this is a nice transition point for folks if you can get into a TPM role to later transition into a product manager role. Is something I've seen very, very common. Alrighty, thank you, Alexander. So we will now begin the mock interview session. Are you ready?
Oh, it hasn't started.
It has not started.
Okay.
No. All right, are you ready, my friend?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you so much for applying to Fetch Robotics. Really excited by your resume here. Can you tell me about yourself and kind of walk me through your resume today?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. I appreciate your time. So I'm a transfer student from City College of San Francisco, and then I transferred to San Jose State recently graduated. And so I studied industrial technology manufacturing systems. It's basically a degree in applied engineering and a minor in business. And so I have a lot of technical background based off my degrees and experience in community college, as well as my experience at San Jose State. And I've also taken a lot of different business courses at San Jose State for my minor. So going into my role at Buckle Smith, I'm a project and quote specialist. What that means is my responsibilities include supporting the back end, which is production. So if there's any issues with the technicians, or they need documentation, or they have a project for myself to improve a process, then I jump to there and I help them out there. And then for the front end, which is the sales side, I support them with quotations as well as projects to improve the quotation process and reaching out to customers, communicating with them, and recently just doing a standardization of how we do our quoting process. You want to go a little bit further back, Winslow Automation, I was a mechanical engineering intern, and where I learned how to do a lot of my assembly work. And it kind of legitimized my backyard mechanic experience into a more technical science role, or technical role, I guess. And then the rest of that is really just my experience with my hands-on skills and coursework that's relevant, and my experience working in teams at San Jose State as well as community college.
Okay, got it. So overall time wise, in terms of like your length of answer, was pretty good. I think it was a little bit over a minute, which is fine for like a tell me about yourself style question. One thing to keep in mind is you want to highlight stuff that is not easily apparent on the resume, just because if I'm speaking to you as a hiring manager or recruiter, I've probably already seen your resume, thought you were a great fit, and then therefore given you a call. So recapping kind of stuff like where you went to school, what your degrees are in, what you had your major and your minor in, is all stuff that I've already have context of before, unless you wanted to highlight certain things or maybe make certain connections that maybe wouldn't be easily relevant. I would try and just stick to either new information, or what I also recommend even more is tailoring your response and experience to match what they're looking for here in a technical project manager type position. And also, when I had asked in the beginning to kind of walk through the role itself, it's very key to have a good solid understanding of the role that you're applying for, especially when you're looking to make a bit of a career change or job switch, right? Because you want to know what are the relevant transferable skills or projects that you've been working on at your current company that would translate over nicely into this TPM style role, so that the hiring manager feels confident that even though on paper you're not a technical project manager, you have relevant skill sets that would be easily valued or be able to bring value to the company, right? So when you were talking about process improvements, for example, which is something a project manager would do, if you could do like a quick little double click, right? Give me an example of some projects you fixed on the back end or the front end with sales, right? And then of course you got to give me a little bit of the result, right? Like just fixing a process to fix a process doesn't mean anything unless you're able to, I don't know, increase sales, right? Reduce costs, labor costs, errors, I don't know, stuff like that, right? So you can think of it kind of like a mini star example, but very, very quick without too much context, just because you're just trying to walk them through the relevant parts of your overall resume. Does that kind of make sense?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you want to give it one more shot?
No, but I'll do it.
And it's not going to be perfect, right? Because we're basically reiterating and practicing on the fly. And so the main thing is that you can make certain adjustments and tweaks, and then you can always improve after that. So focus on the main things, which is not repeating stuff on the resume and highlighting relevant and transferable skills. Okay. So Alexander, super excited to have you apply for Fetch Robotics. Please tell me about yourself.
All right. So I'm currently a project quote specialist at Buckle-Smith Electric. I've gone through a few projects helping with documentation on the front end as well as the back end. The front end with sales, I was able to increase the revenue by about 100, 150, 175% just by standardizing our methods and standardizing the process that we use to estimate a project. And on the back end, I've used my assembly experience to improve their processes and improve their on-time deliveries by however many weeks. I've cut out quite a few hours of their build binders, and it's resulted in, I don't actually know the numbers, but
that's okay. Keep going.
That many numbers. Yeah. Should I continue?
If you have more stuff you want to highlight, yes, please.
I think those are probably the biggest things I want to highlight that I feel are relevant to the next role.
Okay, Cool. Much better. Obviously, when you practice this and you'll have the numbers memorized and things like that. But it's good. You're highlighting a transferable skill. You're giving a little bit of overview of like why it matters, right? And also the business impact, which is really good. And then overall, I think it's much better.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just check the chat, see if there's anything going on. Shannon says you interview well.
Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for showing Alexander some love and appreciation for putting himself out there. And for those of you who just joined, I'll be checking the chat every few minutes. So if you have questions, hard interview questions that you want to know how to answer, or just general feedback, feel free to put it in the comments. All right. Next question. So can you describe a time when you had to deal with multiple parties or stakeholders and competing priorities?
Yes, so the process improvement that I had described with the front end, with quoting, that process has a lot of different stakeholders, because not only does it affect the front end and our ability to efficiently quote and accurately quote a project, but it also affects the back end, where once we put everything together, well, what does the back end do with all this information, if there is information? And so the project was twofold. One was where we would have to standardize our quotation process and our documentation, so we have a place to store it. And the second part of it was where those documentation, where the documentation lived on our server, so that production or the backend would be able to extract it and actually use it. And so the problem was that the front end, being front end, we like to be very cowboyish. We like to just go and grab things and make it happen and send off a quote, so that we're the first person at the table and the first person that the customer sees as a quote. That's one of the strategies that we have. It's speed, and then we try to be as accurate as possible. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room, but that's just so we can get it to them. But the downfall of that strategy is that the back end might not have all that information. They might not have everything drawn out. Not all the I's are crossed, or not all the T's are crossed, not all the I's are dotted. So what I had to do was take all those stakeholders, both the front end and the back end, get them all into a room, and then talk to them. What does the process look like now? And then what are some of the struggles that you have? And then I mapped all of that out and took out all the things that didn't work so well, or would really just conflicted with how other people do their jobs. And I was able to map out a new process while listening to everyone's needs, but also not necessarily impacting the other side negatively. So we put some constraints onto how our sales is able to quote, but we also set it up so that way the production side would be able to actually process what we're selling, because you can't build what you don't, if you don't have a drawing, and you can't really make everything, like, no one's going to be happy if they're all trying to find out where what is, instead of actually building or actually selling or actually quoting, or, you know. That makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense. And then what was the result of your process change?
I see. So the last portion that I was trying to explain was just that I was able to set up this new process where the documentation was very specific on our server. It was all standardized. So that way we were able to communicate, and actually did a training on this at the end of all this, so that everyone signed and understood what the process was. So the constraints were put in place, and the process was put in place for quotation for the front end, and the back end learned how to extract the information from the server.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it sounds like if I was a team member on the front end or the sales team, it sounds like you just put restrictions on me, which makes my job harder, and I'm not able to move as quickly and produce a quote and be the first one on the table for a customer. So how did you go about convincing the sales team that there was certain trade-offs that needed to happen in order for the back end, in order to be more efficient, essentially, right? Because if I was on the sales team, I would be upset, right? Like, Alexander, you're slowing me down, right? So how did you go about overcoming that?
So I understood there's going to be a give and take. So in order to get the sales team, not necessarily to get the sales team convinced that doing it my way or our way, and getting the information they needed to quote, like pricing, availability, and all that, all those data points, I was able to work with another team member to create a Excel sheet where it would extract the data from our database directly, put it right into the quote sheet, and just embed it in there. And so now, yes, you have to go through this process in order to do it, but here are some other tools to make you faster as well. So not only wasn't just a push back and a take a step back, you have to do things slower. It was, hey, I need you to just do it in a different way, but here are some tools where it can make you faster so you don't feel like you're slowing down for anybody.
Very good, very good. Okay, awesome. So we will end the practice scenario there. Yeah, and that was good. I asked a lot of follow-up questions on purpose just to kind of probe and push your limits, so to say. In terms of why I created this question or why I asked the question in this certain way, as a project manager or program manager in general, that'll basically be your job, right? Is you're going to have to balance competing priorities, timelines, feature requests, et cetera, from different teams. And you're going to have to be the bad guy sometimes, right? You're going to have to tell people no, and you're going to have to tell some people yes, and then you're going to have to find a way to make everybody happy, which was essentially what I was trying to understand. And I'm sure any employer will also want to see if you have that soft skill as well. This was a STAR question or behavioral question. So situation, task, action, result. The situation was very easy to follow. So was the task. The action, I think you got a little bit muddled up over there, but I think with a little bit of practice, it'll probably make a whole lot of sense. And the R itself, I had to push you a little bit to give, which is fine. But I think that was also a part because you kind of got lost a little bit in the action part itself. And then for the result, because this is a technical role, any large tech company, especially on the engineering side, they're going to want data, right? Numbers.
Yeah.
So if you could also give me like a sense of, I made X, Y, and Z changes. It was X% more efficient based on blah, 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 right? Or, by improving the quote process, we're actually able to increase sales by X, Y, and Z.
What are the metrics
percentage.
behind my actions?
Yeah. Exactly. Especially when you start to work with engineering teams and things like that. When you tell them to do something, they're going to be like, well, why? Show me why I have to do it X, Y, and Z way, right? Why do I have to build this feature? Well, customer survey data says blah, 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 right? So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. But overall, very good answer. Let's see if there's anything in here. Okay, lots of questions. All right. What if we can't quantify results into numbers? So I think that's where, well, it's kind of twofold, right? So I do believe that almost everything can be measured. I can't think of something right off the top of my head right now that would not be measured, right? Like there's customers, like there's like customer satisfaction, there's like employee satisfaction, there's sales, revenue, cost, some type of efficiency generation, because ultimately at work you don't necessarily do something unless there's some type of benefit, right? So almost everything can essentially be measured, but if you can't quantify it, I guess you would, I'm trying to think of something that can't be quantified. If you could put something in the chat, Heidi, about what can't be quantified as an example, then I can maybe give you a way to explain it or measure it, I guess, essentially. I'll have to think on that one. Shannon says, what story would you tell about yourself that makes you interesting? Oh, that's a good question. You want to take a shot at that one, Alexander?
Story about myself that makes
you interesting. Yeah.
One story that I'm on the fence about sometimes is that I have been in higher education for a very long time. So before I was able to get my degree, I actually was in community college for 7 years. And before I transferred, I actually transferred as a undeclared student and conditionally at San Jose State. And so when I got admitted, I actually wasn't admitted the first time. I had to appeal. And so when I got into San Jose State, they required me to get into a major within 2 years. So the first year, I spent an entire year trying to get into chemical engineering because it wasn't impacted. It wasn't impacted because it's extremely hard. It's a really tough major. And so the second major that I didn't make it in for that first year, the second major that I tried to get into was industrial and systems engineering. And both majors I really appreciate. I learned a lot there. I didn't get the grades that were required for me to get into the major, but I learned a lot. And so the guidance counselor kind of said, well, here's the thing, that your 2 years is up and you need to either get into a major or you need to leave. And so I fell into industrial and systems engineering, or no, industrial technology with an emphasis in manufacturing systems. And lucky for me, I feel really fortunate that I kind of fell into that major. It was a really good fit for me. It was applied engineering and a minor in business. Those are two things that I find really interesting. Manufacturing is a big thing for me. Assembly is a big thing for me. Hardware and the business side of things as well. So understanding how the exchange of resources is really interesting to me. So that's my very long story, but probably one of the most defining things about myself.
Okay, good, nice. And that's not something that's easily attainable from your resume, right? Because it doesn't say how long, for example, you were at
I did that on purpose.
City College. Yeah, and I think that was a very smart move. But yes, it is something very interesting that would highlight something different about you compared to other candidates. So that's definitely one way to approach it. Let me just see what else we got in here. Krishna says, good job. Oh, I think Albert has better worded my question for you. Tell me about a time when you had to juggle multiple interests at once and what you did if people got mad at you. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much what I was asking you in a nutshell.
Yeah. One other thing to follow up with that is once everyone signed the training, that held them accountable to the process. So I'm still always going back and saying, you signed this saying that you did the training. Therefore, you agreed to follow this process. So please stop getting in my face and follow the process.
Nice. Okay. I like that. It's like a nice CYA for you as well, and keeps them accountable. Okay, very cool. I guess for the what story would you tell about yourself that makes you interesting? My approach to answering that would have been along the lines of something like, well, for me, I don't have the traditional recruiting background. I'm actually one of very few, so I've learned, recruiters who've actually came directly from management consulting. I did two career switches prior to even becoming a recruiter, but they were internally. The first one was moving from finance and accounting strategy over to sales, and I would say like sales and overall corporate strategy itself. Both of those experiences were good and challenging, and I actually feel like there's a lot of transferable skills between both of those different areas of work, especially when it comes down to process improvement as well as client management, which I know are really key to being a strong recruiter, as well as pattern recognition. And so when you couple both of those experiences along with the hands-on recruiting experience that I've been able to gain working at my current role, I feel like I can bring something unique to the table other than just being someone who can call candidates, look them up on LinkedIn and move them through a process. I've also been able to improve certain aspects of our overall company recruiting process, like creating a time analysis study, which essentially increased overall efficiency for the entire recruiting workforce by about 13%. So that would have been like my take to that question. So hopefully that's helpful, Shannon. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is highlight something unique about myself, just like Alexander did, and then I'm going to highlight certain skill sets that bring back my uniqueness, I guess, if that's a word, back to the job description itself in terms of what they would be looking for.
That was a trick question. I was supposed to bring it back to the job interview.
Almost everything is going to be related to
Yeah.
to some part of the role. Okay. Yeah, and Albert said keep it 90% professional, maybe 10% 10% personal. If you really want to be personal, tie it back to the job or company.
Usually when I tell that story, I make it so that I show how diverse my experience is and how I can understand how other players, how other people, different roles play into an entire process or organization.
Yeah.
I think that probably would have been better, but didn't go that way.
Yeah. And then Christina, I see your question. I will circle back to that one after we do one more practice interview question with Alexander. Okay. You're doing great so far, by the way.
Thank you.
All right. Dun, dun, dun. Let's do this one. Okay. So here at Fetch Robotics, right, we have a few different products. Which one of our products would you say is currently your favorite, Alexander?
The products I find to be my favorite would be I forget what it's called, but it's a 1500. It's basically a 1500. It's a 1500 kilogram material mover. It's a robot that's autonomous, and it'll go around. It knows exactly where it's going, and it'll stop for anything that's going around, as if like people going around, people walking around the warehouse or forklifts. It doesn't necessarily replace a material handler, but it definitely keeps the process of moving material very safe and very efficient because it is autonomous. It knows where it's going, and it doesn't. It actually really like that the feature has multiple emergency stops on it, so that if something were to go wrong, anybody around could jump over and hit the button really quickly. And it's just so massive, and there's so much that goes into it. It's probably one of my favorite devices that they make.
Okay. Sounds like you've done a lot of research about my company, which is very, very good. Now, so imagine we were going to come out with a version 2, a new and improved A1500, and it's going to release sometime in 2021. Okay. And you're hired now as a technical project manager, and I put you in charge of this product release. Walk me through your initial project plan to get all the engineering teams on board and in order to meet our deadline and release schedule for next year.
Sure. Okay. So, well, I would need to find out who the stakeholders are, and so I need to find out what our goal is, what our timeline is, what our budget is, who's going to be readily accessible to me and to the team, so that we can come together and create a solution, and then as well as find out who's available to me and to the team to execute all these actions. I think there are several tools in project management that you could use to help facilitate the planning of it. I could make a Gantt chart. I could use like a project planner. I know that Fetch internally they like to use the agile development, or they like to use the agile methodology where you kind of take little. From my understanding of it, you take little chunks of deliverables, and then you get with the team and you meet to see how to get that done. And you meet every day, I think, for 1 to 4 weeks. And then once you get to the end of that, I think it's called a sprint. You get together and see what you have. And then the thing I like about that process is that you're able to be not to play on the word, but you are very agile because you're meeting every day, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to pivot and adapt to what the needs are based off of the projects. If there's any hiccups, you can address them really quickly. If there's any changes in requirements, you can also address those really quickly. And I think it's a really good process or tool to use so that you're meeting your goals, you're hitting all the points that you need and the requirements that you need, but you're also communicating with your team a lot. So you can pivot and you can change throughout that process.
Okay. Yep. So we do use the agile method. And so what would your project plan look like?
Oh. I'd have a kickoff.
With who? With which teams?
I kick off with the software team, the robotics team, the hardware team, and whoever's giving me this request.
Okay. And you would want all members of all those teams in your kickoff meeting?
No, I would probably pick out folks that are either other project managers or leads, so that they can point me to who can do what job.
Okay. So you have your kickoff meeting, and then what else?
Once I have that, I can get a better understanding of what expectations there are for the teams and what they can provide to reach that goal. And then I can set up a plan and then bring the team back in and see if that all works out. And I guess, enter into the agile method.
Okay, got it. All right, so we'll end the practice scenario there. Okay, so this was the first hypothetical style question that I crafted for you. It's very similar to like a mini case study example almost. And this is definitely going to be something you're probably going to run into almost at any tech company that you apply for. They will put you in some type of hypothetical scenario that definitely applies to your job. It may even be a current problem that they're trying to solve within the role itself. Step number one is try and get some information from me as the interviewer before you start to create some type of solution. I think you were thinking out loud at the beginning. Those were probably questions you were, I think, directing at me, but didn't quite say so. And they were all very valid questions, right? Like, who do I need to meet with? What's my overall timeline? Like, when in 2021 is this thing due? Who are the major stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe trying to think through what types of questions you can ask me before you start to dive in. And I would say maybe 1 to 2 questions, no more than 3 at the most. So you really need to make sure that those questions count. There also needs to be a very strong and firm understanding of Agile. It's a minimum requirement for the role, especially for any TPM, whether it's at Fetch Robotics or any other company. So being very, very familiar with Agile and the terminologies and things is definitely going to be very, very helpful for you. In the interviewer scenario, right? Like you wouldn't need to explain what Agile is to me as the interviewer. You may have been doing it just because you know that I'm not a TPM itself, but just so you know in the actual interview, you don't have to do that, right? Which is why I was trying to redirect you back to the actual project plan, right? So those are just some quick things to kind of think about in terms of initial feedback. Any questions about those?
No, that all makes sense.
Okay. Now let me circle back to Christina's question. Could you please share any tips or advice for how to balance sharing both personal and professional experiences when answering the question, tell me about yourself? Albert said, try to keep it 90% professional and 10% personal. I think it just kind of depends on the story in which you want to craft. So essentially, tell me about yourself in recruiter language is basically like, why should I hire you? Or like, why are you qualified for this role? Or why are you the best person to hire for the role? So one thing I always recommend is you ask them to go first and give you some context about the job itself. Job descriptions, as you can even see from this one for Fetch Robotics, super generic, right? Very, very high level. It's literally like not even half a page of information. So you should get the context of what they're looking for, what the specific responsibilities are, like how big the team is, et cetera, because there may be certain things you would want to highlight in your background that match exactly what they're looking for. And you don't want to just start listing things somewhat at random that you think they might find valuable. So get some context first and then start walking them through your background. And then to Albert's point, like the story you craft, it needs to be interesting, right? It's kind of like all these questions combined together. You should have some type of story about yourself that's not just like a chronological thing of like, I work here and then I do this, and then I used to work here and I did this, right? You need to connect all the dots for your recruiter or hiring manager so they can understand what makes you special and unique and why you are the best person for the role, right? In this case, why are you the best technical project manager that they can hire, as opposed to just an average one? So hopefully that kind of helps, Christina. Okay, and then Heidi had a follow-up question. I believe you asked, like, how do you quantify things if you don't have numbers? Now that you mention it, I am finding ways I could have quantified accomplishments, but I don't have the data. For example, improving a training. People seem to catch on faster, but we didn't measure how much faster or do a post assessment. Gotcha. Well, I think it's awesome that you were able to identify that. Maybe you should do like a post assessment, like a quick little survey monkey to kind of gauge things. Also, it's not an exact science. Like no one's going to be auditing you during your interviews and even on your resume, as long as you're not over embellishing your impact, but being able to take a rough guess of like how you were able to make things more efficient or effective or make them, learn faster or reduce attrition, right? Make people happier. You can always make a conservative guess in terms of percentages or numbers as needed, as long as you're not like overdoing it. You know what I mean? Like I doubled sales, even though because that's very impressive, which means people are going to ask you follow-up questions. And so like if your number is too outlandish, you're going to need more information to kind of back it up. But in the case about like improving a training, yeah, if you could say like people were 10% more effective or something, that's like a conservative number where everyone would be like, oh, it had some impact, but no one's going to have you break down 10%, if that kind of makes sense. Okay. All right. Back to you, Alexander. Okay. So imagine you were at work, right, as our project manager, and one of the engineering teams came to you and they said that they were behind schedule on their product launch. How would you communicate this status to our leadership team?
I think the first step for me would be still talking with the engineer and finding out what was going on, what was causing this delay, and also knowing whether or not they can give me a date for when it will be. Not necessarily just it's late. I want to find out why it's late and how late is it and can we recover from this and is there a solution that you can come up with rather than just going up to management just as what I'm perceiving this interaction to be with them, just be like, hey, we're late, and then walk away, right? I want to go up to manager and say, hey, we're late, but here's the details and this is what I suggest we do, but what do you want to do with this?
Okay, so let's say I'm the engineer, right? And I'm like, well,
Mhm.
look, I don't think we're going to be able to hit our launch deadline because we realized that designing some of the features that you or the product manager had requested is actually a lot more complicated than we had initially anticipated. It's
Mhm.
probably going to push our deadline back by maybe 4 months, right?
Wow.
Which is a long time in the software development space for those folks who are listening in. So um, now how would you go about giving a status report to like the VP of engineering for Fetch?
I think that again, I would just try to keep talking about it and get into what the nitty gritty, maybe not too far into it, but just figuring out what the issue is. And then um, you've given the date for how far it was pushed out and just go to the VP and maybe figure out how critical this feature is. Let's say it's like super critical, then I think that the VP would have to talk to like the customer or whoever the end user might be and let them know what's going on. I'm very I think the best way to do it is do what you can in terms of problem solving, but at the end of the day, talk to the person that's going to be using it to see how critical or how vital it is that this feature is in there, or if they can push their own dates out. Because I know that with my experience with customers, sometimes they say, hey, I need this on the 5th, when really they need it on the 10th, and there's a little bit of wiggle room of when they actually need it and when they ask for it.
Okay, but 4 months is a long time, right? So the customers, and it's probably going to be multiple customers, right, who are waiting for this
Mhm.
new A1500 or whatever. And there's a critical feature maybe that, allows it to, I don't know, raise an extra level so you can store stuff higher. I don't know, whatever. But it's
Yeah,
critical, right?
sure.
And I as the VP, have already communicated to the press and to all the customers that it's going to be ready. But
Right.
now you're saying it's not by
Mhm.
4 months. That's a really long time. So I'm obviously going to be upset. So what are you going to do besides you should go talk to the customer, Mr. VP? What else are you going to do to help me feel comfortable or help me solve this
Sure.
problem?
So instead of going, let's take a step back. Before I've talked to the VP, I would need to talk with whoever is bringing the problem up to me, and then talk with other engineers to see if they have a solution as well, and maybe have some sort of meeting to see if maybe another person can have a solution to this rather than just saying, oh, let's go to the VP because something's wrong. That's where I'm at.
Okay, got it. All right, so we will end the practice scenario there. These questions are much more soft skill based, as you can tell, just because we're not diving too much into the technical part of the role itself. But this is obviously going to be something that anyone will run into as some type of PGM role. So in general, I would ask me some clarifying questions before you start to dive in again and walk me through exactly what you're going to do. And also, yeah, I think you were on the right path of like, you need to find some middle ground, right? In your example that you were sharing earlier when you were dealing with competing priorities between your backend as well as sales teams, right? Like trying to find that type of middle ground or creative solution or something in the middle for your VP, especially if you're going to bring something up like that huge, right? And I was trying to escalate it so it seemed like a really big deal, because you're going to need to find some way to make the VP feel comfortable, but also, right, there's going to be major impacts aside from just like, oh yeah, we're just moving it 4 weeks out. Ask the customer if they're okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Because there could be other products that are dependent on us being finished, and by us being 4 months late, maybe something else is now going to be 6 months late, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So that's essentially what I was trying to push you to kind of think through. Okay. Alrighty. Nothing new in the chat. Guys, thank you so much for all the great questions. Please keep it coming. If there's any tough interview questions, just general feedback, or you just want to show more love and support for Alexander, that'd be cool. Alrighty. Where are we on time? Okay, this is probably going to be one of the last questions. So, as you can see from our job description here, there's a lot of different requirements that we have overall. And I think one of the most important ones for us here at Fetch is having experience or knowledge of Agile. So can you tell me about your experience with Agile and what types of projects you've managed?
So in terms of managing projects with Agile, I haven't had experience using it, but there are a lot of familiar characteristics and methods that I have used that are similar. Like I broke it down to you earlier, getting into a meeting, finding out what our deliverables are, and really touching base with folks. Like I've been on this one project where I meet with them 2 to 3 days a week in order to make sure that we're on top of everything and knowing where all the resources are, how much labor time we have that's available. As far as Agile itself, I don't have any formal training of it. I am familiar with it just by searching on it or searching for it through like my Google searches and figuring out like what the top level of it is. But I have been looking into enrolling myself into a program to be certified in it.
Okay.
So I'm not quite there yet, but I'm in that direction, heading towards the direction.
Okay. So the reason why I had this as a separate question itself is to highlight the importance of knowing Agile when you're applying for these types of roles. But B, I also wanted to see how you were going to be able to try and give someone comfort that even though you don't have the direct experience, you've got similar types of PM experience that would translate over into Agile. And so I was looking for you to maybe make some connections between, I don't know, like running sprints, right? Or even using the word sprints, right? Or scrums.
Yeah.
Right, like any type of Agile equivalent terminology, and then explaining like what you did in your role today at Bucks and Smith Electric is basically the same thing as running a sprint or managing a scrum, et cetera, et cetera. Right, like the terminology there is going to be key, like actually using it literally in your answer, and then also explaining to them like, oh look, I did this, and it's pretty much the same thing as running a sprint. Because blank, blank, blank. And this is what I did as the project manager for it. And therefore, this should give you comfort that I could do this role, right?
Yep.
Alrighty. Any questions so far on your end? Anything top of mind or anything you're curious about?
There's a lot to think about you've given me. But there's a lot to think about. Yeah, you've given me a lot to think about. Yeah.
Okay. No worries, no worries. And career changes are challenging, right? So you're going to need to definitely invest some time. And overall, though, it will be worth it when you do get this job in which you are super excited about. Albert has a new question for you. What would you do if a member of the team asked you to do something unethical to ensure that a project succeeded?
I would explain to the. Am I breaking any laws? I'm just
In this
kidding.
case, no. Let's
Okay.
just say you're not going to break any laws, but you know that deep down it's not, it's against the company's values.
Right. And I would hope that the company's values would line up with my values if I'm employed there. So I would first explain to this person, or I think the best way for me to go about it is understanding why this person wants to go about it that way. And then maybe after hearing where they're coming from, then shame them and let them know why it's unethical. In a gentle way, of course, so that I don't want them to get defensive about it, but really understanding the person, why they want to do this and why they think it's beneficial. And then really just giving them the nudge in the right direction. If they really don't want, they really want me to do something a certain way, I think I would just refuse.
Okay. Now let's just say you like the person says, look, we're not going to make the deadline unless we do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay basically saying, okay, yep, I'm okay with this project not meeting the deadline, and maybe the VP getting really mad, potentially having negative consequences for you, like your performance rating, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right? Would you still be okay knowing
What
those
I just said,
consequences? Yep.
yes, absolutely. I think a big part of being a project manager and just being a good employee is just understanding what's right and what's wrong and how, because in the industry that I work in is industrial automation and industrial controls. And when you have people that want to cut corners, it's a lot of lives. It's usually a safety aspect when someone wants to cut a corner, right? And I wouldn't want that on me. I wouldn't want that on the company, and I wouldn't want that on the person that wants to be unethical.
Okay, cool. I think what I was actually hoping you were going to go deeper with that example. I think what this answer would need to like bring it over the top and make it really, really good is if you could tie it back to some experience that you had, either at your internship or your current role, or something you've observed in your current role, right? Turning it into like a mini star question, that would be
Okay,
really, really powerful, right?
sure.
If you were like, I would do this, and then I would explain to them the consequences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
Now, there was a scenario that I've observed at work, and and then you started going down that path, right? Of like in industrial manufacturing, like if you try to cut a corner, it could be hazardous, lives are at risk. For
right.
example, there was a time where either I watched or I observed or on one of your projects, whatever, right? This, and this, and we didn't do whatever was needed, and then this was the consequence, right? And now I've learned from that, and that's why I would, approach it this way, and I would even share that story, I don't know, with the person on my team.
I'm trying to think of an example that I might have, but it's only examples I can think of is the cliche manufacturing NASA example of the gaskets being out of different units and then exploding.
Or maybe you heard like a story or something at work, right? Where maybe something bad was going to happen, and then someone caught it, right? And they were like, oh, don't do X, Y, and Z. And then you were like, why? That seems fine to me. And then they were like, well, Alexander, if you do blank and blank and blank, or like if you take this whatever thingy and you put it with this thingy,
Sure.
like it explodes. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, good to know. I don't know. Maybe that was something that happened to you.
I will have to
Um,
think of an example and put that in my toolbox.
yeah. Krishna says, tip for interviewee, if there is time remaining after you had the chance to ask your questions, you can say, is there anything important I should have asked that I missed? Albert has some really good follow-up questions too to that and to this question. What if shaming them created a bad working relationship that would strain future projects?
When I said shaming them, I wasn't going to go all out and be like, that's a bad idea and you're a bad person. It's more just the process of letting them know why it's bad and why you shouldn't do it. I don't know if that makes a difference in his, if that changes his if he wants to ask that question, but that's how I meant it to go down.
Okay, cool. All
But
right.
actually, I guess I didn't actually answer his question. I don't know. It's I think that when it goes down that way and you have an employee that really doesn't want to play by the rules and has multiple issues with following the rules, and if it impacts people's safety, I think I'd have to tell someone that, or yeah, I think I'd have to tell someone, maybe not officially, but make a note of it for myself or for someone else, so that let them keep an eye out on his behavior, his or her behavior as a technician or an engineer or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Alrighty, so we are a little bit past 7, and those are all of the different questions that I had. Thank you so much for participating and giving us your answers, and a lot of great learning opportunities, not just for yourself, I'm sure, but for everyone else who's watching at home, who may be practicing for an interview or trying to figure out how to prepare. There's a lot of different learnings, and the overall concepts are very, very similar, right? Making sure you're very comfortable with the STAR technique or the STAR method, as well as how to answer hypothetical questions, asking questions up front, and then trying to find some way to structure your answer around certain points or steps. All are great things to learn from our interview today. Then we also covered how to kind of answer the tell me about yourself question with the context of your story as well as the job itself. All right, yeah. Krishna says, fabulous job. Thank you guys. Aiko, you want to make sure you cultivate trust. Good point there. All righty, Albert, that is everything I had on my end, and thank you everyone for your participation.
Yeah, I'm back. Really great job, Alexander, and good job again as usual, Corey. We had, despite this being on my wall, we had quite a few people watching, and I think Alexander answered my my curveball questions pretty well. And so for both of you, as usual, I appreciate your time. And for those of you watching, either from the Facebook group or if you're just on my friends list and you're watching for the very, very, very first time, I appreciate you spending some of your time with us this evening, and that no matter where you are in your job search, you have learned something and can apply it going forward wherever you may be. For those of you who are interested in learning more, we are here to help you transition through the crazy things that COVID-19 has brought us in this new normal. We're doing another live video this Saturday where I will be doing a live resume review workshop in Albert's Job Listings and Referrals, San Francisco Bay Area. In that event, I spend at least an hour critiquing resumes and copy editing them live on air, so you have the opportunity to understand where you can do better. If you want to include your resume, email me at albert@ajobslist.com. And I will go ahead and get you squared away and ensure that your information is also private so that nobody else sees it. Before then, we'll see you in the community and even on my wall if you'd like, with your introductions, your advice, and your success stories. Until then, take care of yourself, stay on the grind, and good luck. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.